Let's go ahead and look at kerning and tracking. The term kerning refers to adjusting the space between two letters. It's basically a fine-tuning process. You want to achieve a visually consistent letter space since consistent spacing strengthens readability. This may involve increasing space between tight letters or decreasing space between loose letters. You don't want your reader to stumble over awkward-fitting letters. Gaps occur around letters whose form angles outward or frame an open space. Letters like capital W, Y, V, T, and L. Because the space between characters expands as the type size increases, designers often fine-tune letter spacing when working with large letters. Most page layout applications have a checkbox that allows you to tell your program to automatically take advantage of kerning pairs if you're using a font that contains them. Many well-made fonts have kerning pairs built into them, and they take into account letter pairs that are most often problematic. This is referred to as matrix kerning. Some applications also have the option to use optical kerning. This method takes the shape of each letter pair into consideration and adds or removes space based on the letter shapes. Optical kerning is the best option when you are combining characters from different typefaces. You always have the option to manually kern in any page layout program. If you take into consideration the capital letter V, it has a very unique shape. It has a deep valley and limbs that stretch way above the base. If you compare that to a capital L, a letter that is solidly grounded and harbors empty space higher up. If you use automatic kerning, or by using automated kerning issues caused by these and other letters, they can be solved when those letters are paired with other letters. Some letters require a personal touch, though, of manual kerning. Capital letters often fall prey to this, as does typeset at larger sizes. So here's some very large type, and if we look at this type, if when I mouse over it, you'll see the kerning issues if you don't already see them. So you can see that some of these letters are a little far away from, or a little too close from, the other letters that they're working with. It's extremely apparent with the W, and the W is much like the V, where it's very thin at the bottom and then it gets very wide at the top, but it creates this kind of weird awkward space right here. So here at the bottom you can see the exact same line of text, but it's been optically corrected. The kerning's been optically corrected, and I think that you'll agree that it's easier to read the example below than the example above. Let's look at tracking. Tracking basically adjusts the space across a word, line, or column of text. It's also known as letter spacing. It is a common practice to letter space capitals and small capitals, which appear more regal when standing apart. By slightly expanding the tracking across a body of text, the designer can create a more airy feel. Negative tracking is rarely desirable. This device should be used sparingly to adjust one or more lines of justified type. Don't use tracking to make text fit or to save space. That's just not the right reason to use tracking. In some situations, text benefits from tracking, but don't use it as a crutch to make something fit in a specific format. Letters basically like to fit together. They like making words and having meaning. Due to some letters' anatomical differences, some letters have a difficulty achieving intimacy and sharing space. And that's why tracking and kerning are helpful. If you look at these examples right here, you can see that this sentence is basically set in the exact same font face, but the tracking has been adjusted. So here is the font set at 16 point with no tracking, and it's quite readable. Here's the same font. It's set at 16 point with a fairly large tracking, 75 point tracking, and you can see everything's spaced out. It makes it a little more difficult to read. And then finally, here's the same font set at 16 point with a negative 50 tracking, so everything's much closer together, and you can see it's much more difficult to read the text like this. So use kerning and tracking when necessary to help the letters to fit together, and it is almost always necessary to use kerning when you're dealing with headlines, text that is set in a very large type size.